Hi, it's Lee from the Japanese Water Gardens. This is part 5 of my series of short videos detailing the construction of a new quarantine system. In the previous videos, we installed bottom drains, built a plywood lined timber framework, cast concrete bases, and waterproofed it with fiberglass. The plan is to have the system up and running in time for the new season. So, with much still to be done, we have been working hard. Water changes are an essential part of the maintenance on any pond. This is especially true on a heavily stocked dealer's quarantine. Installing a good drainage system for a pond and filter can be a challenge. But fortunately, in our case, the quarantine building is backed by a small wooded area where we can simply dump the water and it will be absorbed by the many grateful trees. Unfortunately for me, it meant that I had to cut, chisel, dig and bash a hole out of the back of the building. When the original 1980s system had been built, they had built it with an internal block wall with a huge cavity filled with all manner of available materials for insulation. Pity I didn't find any buried treasure. Once I had broken through, I laid out 2 pipes and made sure that they protruded a good distance out into the wooded area. I didn't want any water running back in. I then bricked up the hole and formed a simple cement capping. I certainly didn't want any rodents taking up residence in the new quarantine. Filtration is paramount to the success of any pond, and it is vital that we get this right. No matter how many fish we put into the tanks, the filter must break down the ammonia and nitrites quickly and prevent them from becoming concentrated. If you have spoken to me at the shop, you will know that I strongly recommend drum filters, highly effective and very low maintenance filters that are becoming increasingly popular. However, in this case we are constructing a very large traditional multi-bay filter with a few unusual upgrades and tweaks. The reason for this are that the building has limited access. Everything has to come in through a 3-foot wide door. We also need a filter that is not just capable of doing the job, but absolutely and completely, totally on top of the job. We plan to do massive water changes, and that can often mean turning off the pump for large periods of time, waiting for the water level to be restored. Something that I would rather avoid. So hopefully our system will address these issues. I drilled out the chambers with a hole saw. The tank connectors are 110 mm to allow plenty of flow. The main drain for the vortex is 82 mm, as we want to be able to drain this chamber very quickly. The other holes are 50 mm for drainage and pump connections. To make a watertight seal, you use tank connectors sealed with a gasket of aquarium silicone. Then the connectors are attached to the tanks by drawing up the screws. You need to make sure that the screws pull up the flanges and squeeze out the surplus silicone. But do take care not to over tighten them, otherwise the screws will just tear out the threads and leave the screws spinning round. Any excess of silicone can be smoothed back down neatly with your fingers. You don't need to wear gloves, just smear a little bit of washing up liquid onto your fingers and then the silicone will glide under your fingers and not just stick to them. When the first tanks were ready, we moved them into the quarantine. For a brief, awful moment, I thought that they weren't going to fit through the door. That would have been a major embarrassment. However, with Matthew's help, we squeezed them through the doorway. The next problem that I encountered was that the floor in the building was very uneven. Normally, when installing a system like this, you would cast a concrete base and mount the filters on that. But the problem was that the floor level was already too high, and the extra thickness of a base would have made this even more of a problem. I could have dug up the old floor and built a new base lower down, but that would have been a huge amount of extra work. The concrete base in this whole building is many inches thick. So I had to think about the problem for a while. I eventually decided to level the tanks on thin mortar beds. I mixed up some sand and cement by hand, making it nice and sloppy. Then I connected up the first and second tanks. Made sure that they were level on the mortar beds. As an added level of protection, I bricked in the bottoms of the chambers. The main lights in the building were far from adequate, and it was very awkward working down the back, but I wanted to do this as it will prevent the chambers from ever moving off the beds and provide a lot of support for the drains and pump connections. However, if there was a leak, it would mean that I would have no way of getting at it to address it. So I filled the chambers with water. Then made a close inspection of all the joints. No leaks. Happy days. I was a bit concerned about how sharp the metal end on the Jubilee clip was on the rubber boot fitting. So I dressed it up with some electrical insulation tape and stuck down the end with a spot of silicone so it would not lift later. To completely immobilize the chambers, I mixed up some sloppy concrete and poured it in to set. The third chamber is a different shape and needed to be raised on a block work slab. I had not decided until this point how the water was going to enter and exit this tank. So it still needed to be drilled out. I sealed on the connectors and glued on slide valves to the drains and pump outlets. My hands were filthy, covered in silicone and glue. Perhaps those plastic gloves would have been a good idea after all. With all these extra complications, I'm starting to think that this system might not be ready in time for the new season. Be sure to subscribe, give the video a thumbs up and post any questions in the comments below. See how things are progressing in the next video. It's bye for now from Lee at the Japanese Water Gardens.